Cinema Pursuit. Today is election day, or it's kind of close to election day, and we wanted to talk about one of the greatest movies ever made, the greatest journalism movie ever made, one of the greatest procedural movies ever made. This movie is about competency and doing your job right. And Zach, tell me what the job is today.
We are doing All the President's Men on the pod today. This is a very important movie from the 70s about the Watergate scandal. With election season coming to a close, we'll be dropping this pod somewhere in the very beginning of November, I expect, or the very end of October. We wanted to use this as an opportunity with the election season ending to talk about one of the greatest political movies of all time. And I know there's been a lot of different types of political movies, political thrillers, some that are maybe more about trying to find certain facts about a political situation that's still unknown, like JFK. But in terms of grounded, factual, realistic movies about a political, let's say, scandal or just a political object of intrigue, this is one of the
Conspiracy.
we can say that too, but I mean that in that, there's a lot of movies where, like, Harrison Ford's running around with people shooting at him in some sort of political conspiracy. I'm talking about grounded, real, based on real events movie. This is pound for pound one of the best political movies of all time.
And it's 48 years old this year. It's 1976 this movie came out. And do you know the whole story of like when they made the movie and when these like situations happened essentially?
Tell us.
So Nixon left office August 20th, 1974. But before that, a couple months before that, Woodward and Bernstein wrote the book June 15th, 1974, All the President's Men came out. And before that, Robert Redford was actually talking to Woodward and Bernstein, being like, I want to take this story of y'all and make this into a movie. I need to do this. So what, like, give me the rights. And they're like, going Hollywood, I'm not sure about this. But when the book came out, they actually bought, like, he bought the rights for like $500,000, which is a lot of money then, and it's still a lot of money now. And within 2 years, April 5th, 1976, this movie came out. I think they had a $6 million budget. They made like $80 million. So like it's a smash hit for them back then. And why is it that this movie's compelling? It's not because, they're explaining Watergate. It's about these two journalists uncovering one of the craziest things of all time. And Spielberg plays into it a little bit with the Post about like, it's the Post versus literally the government, the executive branch. But in this movie, it's almost two branches of government. And then the FBI, like there's a whole conspiracy going on against them.
Yeah, just like Deep Throat says later in. You're going to have to not laugh every time I bring that up because I'm going to be saying that a lot.
Just call him DT.
Yeah, well, deep background. So when Deep Throat later on in the movie says, you have to start for a conspiracy, you have to start from the edges and work your way in. This movie really does a good job of that. It doesn't implicate Nixon, even directly until the very, very end. And even then, it's not even a direct implication. They don't implicate most of the executive branch until you get towards the end. The movie starts you with the edges, at the edge of the case, and you learn about the case as the movie goes along, as the main characters are learning about the case. Now, historically, probably when this came out, a lot of people probably had a better idea of the case. So some of these were not as surprising developments. But I'm sure there's a lot of people who would watch this now who don't know a lot about Watergate, know that Nixon was involved, but don't know how to connect the dots from, the break-in at the Watergate Hotel to Nixon. This movie does a really, really good job of drawing those connections for you. Even if it is an overload of information, that's what makes this movie interesting, is that it's trying to tell you everything that actually happened, and it's trying to show you all the steps that had to happen to get it to happen. This movie's just as much about this movie's about a political conspiracy. It's about good journalism. It's about how to get good journalism, and it's finding facts. It's checking your sources. It's following leads. And like Deep Throat says, it's following the money. And this movie does a great job of just showing you those tenets of what good journalism is.
And it's the art of the truth, meaning you're talking about uncovering the facts, figuring out what the situation is, making sure that whatever you're telling them is crafted as a story and it's compelling. So people like read it, listen to it, and heed it. Because people can just, read it and then just, on to the next page. It is what it is. Just like today, your 24-hour news cycle, we were talking about with Inside, how you'll be scrolling, you'll see literally the worst things that's happening in someone's life. And then you'll just see, a happy photo of somebody and some flowers, and it's like, autumn or whatever. And it was happening back in 74, but it was happening less because they do have a line in one of the newsrooms or in the editor's rooms, and they're having a meeting. He's like, yeah, like that piece that you're talking about, that's probably gonna be the most read thing. And we're all trying to do serious news, but it's like that story, that sappy story is gonna be the one everybody actually like listens to. But it is good journalism in this movie. And some of the best scenes are exactly that. It's about condensing it down, figuring out, okay, this is how you grab them. These are the facts. We've figured out all these sources. And it's like, there's a lot of juice to this movie because it's about the procedure of how they do the things. And that's supposed to be thrilling. And see, this is a movie. Like, you couldn't put this movie into a theater, right? Like, you can't
I
put
don't
this into a
understand.
play.
Well, I think this could be a play. Yeah.
I'd argue otherwise because
I think
it's the same thing as Steve Jobs. Because if you made this or Steve Jobs in a theater, like as a play, they would be plain. They wouldn't have the sauce that they have now.
I
Because
completely disagree there.
nah,
These are the type of movies that would do well, and even
no,
when
but
Sorkin was writing Steve Jobs, he talked about wanting to make a play version of it as well.
yeah, the
And
dialogue works, but everything else that actually like keeps me there, whether it's like Gordon Willis or Alan Kuchler, like shooting the crap out of their movie, the editing, the directing, like you're not gonna have that at the play. You're gonna have the great acting, but this movie doesn't work because of the great acting alone. And there's so many. See, Alan Pakula or Alan Pakula, he's passed away now. He's the director, and Robert Redford is the one who put this movie together. Like, he's the producer. He bought the rights. He wanted to make this movie. No one wanted to make this movie, but he wanted to. And Redford was like, okay, we're gonna go documentary. Like, this is gonna feel documentaristic, and this is not a documentary. Pakula was like, yeah, you can do documentary, but there's a little bit of sauce. There's the little pieces where you have to like create tension within these scenes, and that'll make a good movie. It's not going to be theater. This can't just be a documentary, because you either make the version that feels like a play, or you make a version that feels like a documentary. But this is like a mix of the two. You know what movie I was thinking about? Right, like honestly, what movie came up because I was like watching this. It's a movie we're going to be doing next year.
what is it?
Moneyball. You know
Yeah,
how there's a lot of like there's all those scenes in the room with all the guys, and he's like, but they get on base, right? Those scenes and the opening with Oakland A's and Giambi and everything happening. You see all the archival footage. It started with this. It had to have started with this, and it's like
I
weaving the
yeah.
narrative, like the the stuff that you're making up, the dramatic stuff that you're shooting with actual archival footage. This is the genius. This is where it started.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think that when these movies that toe the line between a movie and a documentary, and they're always more movie than documentary. We don't have to get it twisted there, but I think when they decide to cut in real footage to help supplement the movies, I think that gives a bit of legitimacy to the movie. You know, when you actually have Reagan's renomination being shown on the TV at the end of the movie, or when you have the RNC being shown on the TV, it reminds you that these events are real and that real people were watching them and responding to them in this, made up movie world. And I think I'm trying to think of some other movies
Oh,
that
I
do that
got you.
real well.
No,
Moneyball does it.
but
Steve Jobs does it.
even besides these,
Um,
very emotional one is Zero Dark 30, which
Zero
the
Dark
entire
30.
movie you don't really see archival footage, but the opening of the movie, Catherine Bigelow has an actual voice, either a voicemail or a voice call from one of the passengers on United 93, if I remember correctly, talking to their family, scared for their lives. And what she does is she sets the tone of like why all these events happened. It doesn't say that she's, supporting, waterboarding or something like that, but she's saying this is the reason why all this happened. This is how we got to the path of trying to find Osama bin Laden. This is where it starts emotionally. And this movie, it is the start of that. It's like emotionally bringing you there. And it is about setting the tone. This movie is actually PG. They had it at an R, but they were like, oh, this movie is so important with what it's trying to share that it needs to be a PG. Because I watched it again. I didn't realize there was so much cursing in this movie. I'm going to get to it in dialogues. There's something they say about Meryl Streep's character, Katharine Graham, in the post. Like that woman, they say something about her in this movie. And I was like, oh, growing up now, I'm like, oh, that dialogue is terrible. That man did not need to say that about her. But it's like, we'll get to it in a minute.
Yeah.
But let's
Well,
talk about journalism since we're talking about her. So, the fall of journalism is something that I wanted to talk about because you know who bought the Washington Post, right?
Bezos.
And it's like it bugs me so much that that man bought it. And it's not even him, it's just the entity of like it's nothing to him. And you look at the culture of what they did in this movie, you look at the culture of what happened with the Post, and even though they had an entity behind it, Katharine Graham back then, they still pushed for stories and they're trying to do genuine journalism with it. And for me, journalism is detective work. You watch this movie, this is a detective movie. This is Blade Runner to me. But
Hmm.
there's a lot more like talking going on. Blade Runner, there's barely anything. There's a lot more mise en scène.
I know, I get what you're going for there, and I do agree that journalism has changed a lot since this movie came out, and
The news
there's
cycle has
probably
changed.
the news cycle has changed. It's gone more towards television, and if honestly though, I think this movie sees that coming and kind of
Oh yeah.
um, it talks about it in a way that's not in your face, where you notice that the information you get from the TV, what is the TV showing? You're showing you the RNC. It's showing you Nixon's cronies talking about how they're completely innocent, but they're non-denial denials. It's Nixon getting his second inauguration. The television is showing you what is happening without having anybody to tell you what's factual, having anybody to do the reporting of what's real. It's just trying to get you the story. The movie shows you that without commenting on it, but I think this movie is condemning television journalism in a real way with how it presents it.
And there's a line that Redford says and the Woodward says in the movie where he's like, she's scared of them. You're scared of Cronkite when he comes back from interviewing the woman for like 6 hours.
Yeah,
And that's another stab at Cronkite, isn't it?
yeah.
But the thing is, they have the journalism in the movie, but it's like nowadays we have Twitter. Like, if anything happens, you can know within 2 seconds that something happened, something terrible's happened, and then we're on to the next thing, on to the next thing. And that's what newspapers were, but even then it was a bit, like daily, right? It wasn't like every single moment something has to be playing. You must advertise, you must have a story, you must get clicks. It wasn't like that. And true, like these sorts of stories, they still get hype. Did you ever listen to Serial, like the podcast?
No, I know it's a big one.
Sarah Koenig, she's an investigative journalist. She was covering the story of Adnan Syed, which they even made like a whole HBO thing about him and how, they're trying to sparse what exactly happened in this situation. Was he wrongfully convicted? And all of these sorts of things. Very true crimey thing that's happening. And they even parody her, quote unquote, parody her in Only Murders in the Building. Like Tina Fey is playing her in the show. And they're talking about how like true crime is, TV, it's been sensationalized to no extent now. And it is TV that's doing it. And people are still invested within these stories, but they don't necessarily have the artistic heed that they used to have because what's the other side of it? It's become content. And now you have like Jeffrey Dahmer shows, biggest show, most watched show. And people want streaming hours. Like the companies, they want streaming hours. They don't want good movies. They just want you to over sensationalize, over talk about, over share information. That's not helping your story. And this has restraint, right? Like it's not. Oh, what do you think? Do you think it's a good ending to have that? Like you don't show the bad guy getting, like whatever arrested or something like that. It doesn't happen, right? There's no montage at the end of this
I,
movie
I
besides the typewriter itself, right?
I think that undeniably, if this movie was made today, and we kind of had that with the Post, you would show Nixon getting like pissed off at the end, or show his resignation. And the reason I say that is because so much time has passed, they would be afraid someone would watch the movie and not actually know what happened, which is sad. But back when this movie was made, the Nixon resignation was such a big deal that I think showing it would have been redundant for the public. Because of that, and now the ending has aged so well because what you get at the end, because it frames the movie to not end it on Nixon, frames the movie on Woodward and Bernstein. Them writing it and publishing it. And what we see at the end there is them writing their big manuscript or their big article that they're going to publish about Nixon. And you have Nixon looming in the background getting his second inauguration. And it's a fantastic ending that they definitely would have not done if this movie was made today.
It sounds like the juice. So action is the juice with this movie. I'm telling you, this is genuinely one of the most compelling movies I've ever seen in my life. This is as compelling as like Django Unchained, Gladiator, all these other movies that we're doing on the pod that we've been doing. This is so juicy to me. This is like, I don't know about everybody else, but I find this so thrilling, man. So what are the most juicy scenes of this movie for you, Zach? Drop me in.
For a movie that tries to focus so much on the mundane and the technical aspects of journalism, it doesn't give you any of the big, scenes of being scared for the heroes being in peril, for, drama of, are we going to fire them? Are we not? But what it does is when it finally does bring you some of that real danger and drama, it really gives Robert Redford an avenue to show something he has not had to show for the rest of the movie. So the scene I'm talking about is the final meeting scene with
When he
Deep
runs
Throat in the
outside.
garage.
Yeah.
Yeah, where he oversleeps and he has to run to meet Deep Throat. And when he gets there, he's clearly panicked. He's definitely visibly not running on much sleep at all. He's definitely, kind of bloodshot eyes, just not put together like he is for the rest of the movie.
It's like Loki in Prisoners, Detective Loki. You know how Jake Gyllenhaal's like he's like blinking his eyes
Yeah.
really, really hard. I'm telling you, it's a detective movie.
No,
Keep going.
yeah. So Robert Redford shows up and he's in peril and he's trying to discover if all his work was for nothing. But what he finds out even shocks him here is that not only does this go farther than he ever expected, but it goes all the way to the top.
Yeah,
And now his life is in danger. So, and this is why I want to call this out, because in most investigation and procedural movies, this actually happens kind of early because you want to raise the stakes for the protagonist. You want to hear that they're about to be fired on this case and lose their career, or you see like a CIA agent kind of stalking them in the background early on as they're doing their reporting. Usually, this is an early thing to raise the stakes for the rest of the movie. But in All the President's Men, when this happens near the end, the journey our heroes have taken has put them in a dangerous spot. And faced with that danger, they never for a minute even reconsider pushing even further to the truth. So by raising the stakes at the end and having the Bernstein and Woodward not even for a second consider stopping their story, that's what elevates them from eager journalists to American heroes. This is what separates them from someone who's trying to get a story out for fame and someone who's trying to get a story out because they really feel that's the right thing to do as American citizens.
and for the
And,
truth, because this
yeah, and
movie
for the truth.
makes a big note at a certain point where it's like Woodward. It's a funny moment where Woodward's like they're talking to Sloane, and Sloane's like, "You have to understand, like I'm a Republican." And then Redford, like Woodward, snaps back really fast, like I'm a Republican too. And then
That's a good moment.
you just see
Yeah.
Bernstein look at him like this man. It's funny, and it just keeps going. But the whole point is that this is not a it's about politics, but it's not about this side or that side. It's about the morality of the situation. It's about the truth of the situation. It doesn't matter who did what, but if they did it wrong, we're gonna figure it out and we're gonna share that. And
It,
they try to, like you said, you're talking about the TV. What does the TV say? It's like, oh, it looks like Brent Bradley. We know how he votes. He obviously has some sort of a vendetta.
yeah.
It's like, nope, that's not the situation. Is it? It's like, no, I'm out to get y'all. Like, if you're doing it wrong, we're on your case.
And that's what's so just cool about it there is that at the end, like that's the climax of the movie to me,
Oh,
like that
yeah,
is the moment where Woodward is like learning. But here's the thing that's important about it too. This is what I was thinking of. You remember True Detective near the end, how they catch the bad guy, but then season one, but they're like, hey, this goes much deeper
yeah,
than you even know.
yeah, yeah.
That's kind of what happens there. And now it ends up going all the way to Nixon, but that's the moment too where they tell where we're like, hey, you still don't see the whole picture. This goes all the way. This is everybody's involved. Everybody's
FBI,
implicated.
justice, everybody.
Yeah. So it's that level of they finally got it. They got the story right, but they actually didn't get it all the way. It didn't go all the way that they expected, and that adds a little more danger, mystique, drama to the situation. It's just a really good climax for the story, and the story ends very quickly afterwards too. It really carries the rest of the momentum of the story that moment.
But for me, it's like you're talking about like the end. So the movie's on an upward trajectory. Usually it's like, yeah, there's a climax to this story. It almost feels like, we have a recent slew of like part one, part two movies like Mission Impossible, Into the Spider Verse. It's like, this is the part one. And then the part two is, you don't even have to have a movie because it was literally real life. That's what
Yeah.
happened, right? And the thing is, the movie starts with the slamming of the typewriter, right? And it's typing
Mhm.
the date out. And it's like, okay, what is the weapon? What is getting you in? And it's like the weapon is the writing. Your sword is the writing. And by the end of the movie, what happens? They show the antagonist and they show our heroes. And one of them, the bad guy, thinks that he's on top. He's sitting there, twiddling his fingers, even though there's no real villain in this movie per se, but they show what the villain issue is. And they're just sitting there. What all you hear is they're just typing, and it zooms in, and it gets you in frame for that last shot, and it's just like, oh, we see what's gonna happen. That's why that last shot is my reasoning as to why this movie works and in a theater would not work. Because if you do the same thing, you just popped out a TV out like on a stage and just did that, it wouldn't work. There's no sauce there, but it's like every single decision makes this movie work so well.
What do you have for your action as the juice scene?
I'm gonna throw in a couple, but the first one I'm gonna throw in the opening scene, the Watergate break-in. Did you
Mhm.
clock who the cop is that they call to like go and arrest the guys?
No.
That's F. Murray Abraham, like Amadeus, the dude from like White Lotus season 2 for
Oh, he
recent
didn't
memory.
even come up when I looked at the cast.
So
That's really
so
funny.
he's pointing. I took at least 200 screen grabs, like screenshots of this movie because it's. I'm being serious. You'll see why. But the beginning of the movie, the break in itself, where it's like the guard sees the little piece of tape, is like something's going on. Fun fact: that guard is actually the real guard that was at Watergate.
Huh.
Yeah, he was like, I got fired, and then that was the first job I had afterwards.
Huh.
Crazy. But yeah, F. Murray Abraham as a cop goes up, and we see the guys come in with the suits and they got surgical gloves on, and it feels so eerie. It's like you don't know what these guys are gonna do. And I was like, I've been watching too many Fincher movies because this feels like a Fincher movie, doesn't it? At the beginning, he,
And what's interesting is that's the only scene in the movie they really show us. It doesn't involve Woodward or Bernstein either. And I think that's smart, but it sets a tone for almost a very different movie where that's
yeah,
almost a mystery action type
a
movie
Fincher
where you
movie.
really follow. And yeah, Fincher, yeah, exactly. And the set design of it's really well, the building up the tension of where they're going to get caught, but
Like
you're not
gr-
completely sure how or where.
and he's like sitting on the mic
Yeah,
or the radio is like, guys,
yeah,
they turn off the radio, but it's like, guys,
yeah.
there's
Well,
someone
yeah,
there.
him
There's
getting
someone
more
there.
frantic on the radio too, and the whole like the white collar aspect of the crime where they're all wearing suits. But the movie then shifts into something completely different, which I think is very interesting. It's a hook. It's like a narrative hook, but then they don't go back to that style of filmmaking or storytelling
Nope.
for the rest of the movie. Then it's the narrative and the viewpoint is a completely in Woodward and Bernstein's hands after that.
It slowly gets into their hands because
Mhm.
we get to not Bradley, but the other editor's office, and they're like Bernstein's literally sitting outside the office, like, yeah, he's trying to get in on this. And he's like, "Have you finished the last story that I told you to write? Like, why do you want this?" And it slowly creeps into their vision, but they do it so seamlessly that you can't tell.
Yeah.
My second action of the juice scene is a short one yet again, but it's about the journalism. It sets the tone as to who Woodward is, and that's when he goes to the courthouse after Markham, the
Mhm.
country club type lawyer,
Yeah.
and the persistence that he has. It's hilarious because they make it hilarious. Where it's like he's sitting there like, why are you here? Oh, are those your clients? Like, yeah, they're my clients, but they're not my clients. They're the other guy's clients, but he's the one who was there. He showed up and he didn't get a call from them, but someone called him. And there's all this juicy conspiracy stuff going on. But that's not the juice of the scene. That's compelling by itself. But the juice is that he follows him outside to the water fountain and he keeps asking him questions, keeps coming. And then the third time they cut to him at the bench right before the arraignment. And it's just funny the way they cut back. It's like, yeah, this guy's not letting it Markham go. And we get to know who Woodward is. Is like, you can not want to talk to me, but I'm gonna get what I need to get out of you. And that's the thriller part. They set the tone for that so well.
I think it's important to show Woodward's persistence and Bernstein's as well. They show later. I think having to show the type of persistence is needed to uncover a story like this is an extraordinary level of persistence. And I think that's a really low stakes way to show that, oh no, Woodstein is like dedicated to figuring this story out. He is not going to rest or stop till he can figure it out. And then, they fill you in later when he meets Deep Throat for the first time on screen that that's why he knows that this is a real thing, but he just has to draw the conclusions on his own.
For anybody listening, Zach just said Woodstein. Ben Bradley calls them Woodstein, as in Woodward and Bernstein together. And I'm like,
It's
when
funny.
did this Brangelina? Is this where it started? Is this where the name fusion started? I'm
I
like,
and
Ben
you
Bradley, you the one.
there's gonna be times I use it on purpose and use it on accident too, because at this point
They're together.
it's yeah,
They're
it
two
is.
sides of a
But one
brain.
they are, and there's very slight differences to their characters in the movie, but for the most part in the movie, they're really the same person, just operating on this story. Like what they do can really be combined in terms of the protagonist efforts.
100%. I'm gonna throw to the big one that I have, and it's the 6 minutes. It's the Dahlberg call, the oneer,
Mhm.
where it's just
Oh yeah,
it's literally Redford just sitting at a desk making two phone calls. But the drama of the two phone calls, it is so mundane, but it is one of the most compelling things I've ever seen, and that's what cinema is. There's no better like reason of like, oh, cinema can do anything. You want to make the stakes of like your movie be about like, you know, a 4 year old who lost his toy and now he has to go get a toy, and you can make that feel like grand cinema and you're invested in that story. You can invest into any story if it's done properly. And the Dahlberg, it's fantastic.
I want to call back then to what you were talking about before with Moneyball. Remember in Moneyball, the paint trying to trade Pena at the trade deadline, and it's just
Oh,
Brad Pitt on the
yeah.
phone going between different people. Now he's doing it in more of a comical way and with some charisma,
But
but the thing, it's the same idea as this
exactly.
this scene in All the President's Men where it's him working the phones for just an extended period of time. And what's interesting is the little decisions and how he decides to dial it, how he answers it differently for different people, what questions he decides to ask. That's both of them. Well, what they do with their fingers, what they do with their face, their eyes when they're on the phone. It gives a lot of ability for the actor to make certain decisions, to really show a lot of characterization, and to also give a certain level of gravitas to the moment that both scenes do really well.
And the best part for me is at the end of the call, like the second call to Dahlberg, is that he says the wrong name. He's like, "Okay, thank you, Mr. Goldman. I mean, Mr. Goldberg," and then he hangs up the
Yeah,
phone. And I think it felt like either Redford just messed up the line, and that he just went and act with it, or it was Goldman's script. Whatever it was, it's fantastic. It's so
yeah,
natural because it's like you can see that he's kind of getting stressed out, but it's like he's kind of relieved at the end. It's like, I got what I
yeah.
needed.
Yep.
And the Moneyball comparison also speaks to William Goldman and Aaron Sorkin about that philosophy of writing is the same there. And Sorkin talks about it, whereas like you just need two people with opposing point of views or people who need obstacles, and the obstacles are what make it compelling. If people don't get along, there's a friction, you're going to get something out of it. And this is obviously, he's been mentored into this, and you see what his mentor did. William Goldman is one of the most prolific screenwriters of all time for the movies that he wrote. So he didn't like writing this movie for a different reason. I'll get into it. But William Goldman, one of the best. That being said, production value. Production value. What are the most impressive parts of this movie? Whether it's a piece of film shot, artists behind the camera, in front of the camera, scene, moment, anything in between where nothing was left on the sidelines. What it screams production value in All the President's Men for You.
What screams production value to me is actually the noise. That's the production value in this.
Yeah.
Specifically, the newsroom. That setting has so much character given to it, like the clinking and the clanking of the typewriters, the phones that are ringing, the other writers like
Right. Like
walking up and
talking.
down the
Yeah.
aisles, chatting each other, papers moving hands, and the decision to leave out a score during all that. You easily could have put in any number of types of scores, good scores during those scenes, but they don't do that. They want us to be able to really listen to our main characters do mundane tasks such as typing and reading notes and dialing a phone And doing that without a
Bro,
score also drives our focus to the wider room as a living, breathing place where other people are making noise, and you see that in the background, and you can clock it even if it's intentional or unintentional. You clock that. And I just want to say, in terms of like iconic set pieces,
yeah,
I put this newsroom from All the President's Men
tops,
up there with
tops.
like the boat from Jaws, the
Yes,
Shining Hotel.
yes.
Like this is one of the most iconic and best pieces of production design that I have seen in a movie ever.
Bro, it was Burbank. They did this in California. No, no, literally, I've seen this movie 4 or 5 times, and it has never crossed my mind to be like, "Oh, they did this on a set." It cost them $450,000 to actually put this thing together in Burbank. But like you're saying, it just feels like a real place to me. It feels so lived in. And Spielberg, I feel like he made a whole movie. He made The Post 100% because of how much he loved this set, and he tried to recreate it. He did his own thing. He got a different juice out of it. But what they do in this set, and then the way that Gordon Willis shoots it, the way that they're talking, the way that we float around the entire set itself, this is the level of thrill that you want to have in your movie.
Yeah, and it's a level of just careful thought and design that everything that's happening in that newsroom was decided upon. And to make the conscious decision to want to show all the clinks and clanks, to show the noise, it also builds its own level of stress too, to where there's so much always going on in the background that it also makes Woodward and Bernstein feel smaller. That if you think about it, if there wasn't other stuff going on, all the focus would be on Woodward and Bernstein, and they would feel like these really important main characters at this newsroom.
But
They're small players there. They are not, they're both
yeah,
young and unproven. And just so to have everything going around them shows that the whole workspace doesn't revolve around those two. The world doesn't revolve around those two. They're small players in a larger game.
and I think they had only in real life they had only been working there. One of them had been working there for like 6 months. The other one might have been working there a year. So very new to these jobs,
Hmm.
and they have like the sound you're talking about. It's in the newsroom, but it also comes outside because when he goes to meet the woman at the, I guess, the rooftop like restaurant that's in DC, and all you I hear a plane coming by, and at some point she tries to talk over the plane a little bit. She doesn't like yell or something,
Yeah.
but she like tries to get over the audio of that. And this is at a point where there's no surround sound. Like when you're like mixing a movie and doing all that sort of stuff, there's no surround sound to be had. But the sound in this movie is fantastic. I was thinking about, I was like, I would love to hear somebody trying to make like a mono or like a two-sided like soundtrack and make it like this, because this is so compelling, and the sound makes a difference in this movie. That's what I'm saying. They use every single little piece of detail to create the environment. And even you're talking about the newsroom. Every time they set up the guys to be talking, they're usually in the front of the shot, depending on whose like perspective it's from. Like, when Bradley comes in and he reads the pages and he pulls out his red pen. I'm like, what an English teacher! And just like starts like like writing, just writing, like, oh, like
Yeah.
annotating. And that's the whole thing. It's like it's from his perspective. He puts his feet on the desk and the shot is on
Hmm.
this side, and Woodward and Bernstein are over on the other side of the shot, where it's like on the z-axis we have Bradley in front of us and the guys in the back. But there's also other scenes where we have on the z-axis of a shot where we have Woodward and Bernstein, and then we just have a stack of books. We have the desks, we have all this stuff behind them, and you see a whole life behind them. And it's not necessarily ever needed, but it is needed for cinema, because you tell somebody to make this movie, like, if, like, let's say I don't have any money and I wanted to make this movie, I just go and put two people in a room and they've got their little typers, and that's that, right? There's no sauce to where they are and what they're doing. But it's like the entire environment of it brings sauce to it inherently because it's so compelling. Or go
So,
ahead.
what's your production value?
My production value very much is it's the dialogue of the conversations inside the newsroom, which you're talking about the sound, but I'm talking about the content of it, in the sense that every time the editors are talking in their like little meetings that they have, it's like, oh, like Foreign has this going on, National has this going on, Metro's going to get 8 columns or 15 columns. And every time they're trying to publish, it feels like a detective going into, like talking to their lieutenant or their chief, like, hey, chief, the scene in 21 Jump Street where he's like, or no, 22 Jump Street, where he's like, find the supplier, bust, like Ice Cube's going on, is so
Yeah.
tirade. It feels like that, but it feels like it's happening multiple times through the movie where they're like, we need, like, this is the story, this is where we are, these are our sources, we have 3 of the 5 sources of the people who can, distribute the money from the creep fund. And they have all sorts of details of like, oh, like Japan is breaking ties with China. It's like, wait, we're still dealing with this today. And it is so much of that Moneyball vibe. There's a 12 Angry Men vibe because 2 of those editors are actually the jurors, juror number
Yeah.
1 and juror number 7 in 12 Angry Men. And it's like they have so much juice there. And it's very mundane, but it's like it feels like an office where it's like you're having exchanges of ideas, but it never feels like there's something dramatic going on that's going to like shift the plot or change something else. Like it's just we're getting to exist within their world, their setting. And this movie it's competency corn. Like
Yeah. No, no.
that's a term now where it's like you watch John Wick. And it's like John Wick is super competent with his guns. You can translate that to anything. Then this movie's about the competency of journalism.
I get that, but it also shows some of the messiness. Bernstein and Woodward aren't perfect
Oh
with
yeah,
all the decisions they make. Even Ben Bradley, who does a really good job of showing a lot of competency, he's also not always sure about the next step forward either. And even though he serves as a blocker for Woodward and Bernstein, he also is there to make sure that the story at the end of the day is gotten right. I did want to just bring up what you said about them having the editors meeting. I think that's an important scene to show. For part of it is that the movie puts so much effort into showing Washington Post as a real breathing workspace. You got to show, okay, so everybody does the stories. The viewer is wondering, well, how do they decide what's going to go in and when? Okay, well, the editors meet, and we're going to show you have a meeting where the Watergate stuff comes up for maybe a few minutes during it, but for most part, it's about these other stories they're
yep.
talking through, and by that gives a lot of legitimacy to the Post as a real workspace, a real workplace exists.
It's
So
making the mundane
yeah,
compelling.
yep. Yep, and that's what this movie does the entire time. So I do like that choice for production value.
And it's like they have so many details in there. But that being said, dialogues. The dialogue in All the President's Men, I feel like this script was longer than like a Sorkin script because you have to like explain half the things that are going on. That's what it feels like. But what are the most amazing pieces of dialogue out of this movie? Because I love the dialogue in this movie. What's up, Zach?
Yeah, so this movie has a lot of great dialogue, but it's not usually very, what's the right
They don't sit
word?
with it.
You say Sorkin, this is the opposite of Sorkin dialogue. This is dialogue that is very fact heavy,
It's
very
chewy, meaning like
chewy.
you
Yeah,
have to like or we used to do these exercises in a little theater class that we had in middle school
mhm.
where it's like you're literally chewing your words, and this feels like you're chewing on the words rather than the scenery.
Yeah,
And but
this
it doesn't discount the information itself. They make it compelling.
Yeah, and they do have some things that are said. Ben Bradley gets a lot of really good lines in this movie, but for the most part, this is a movie about just trying to deliver facts in an efficient way. Saying that, the movie does get some time to talk a bit more broadly and give some themes in its dialogue whenever the conversations with Deep Throat happen. That usually allows for a little bit of more of that type of conversation. So my dialogue selection for this movie is when he says, forget the myths that the media created about the White House. The truth is, these are not very bright guys and things got out of hand. So, the reason I like that is because it underscores that part of this movie's ethos
Yeah.
is tearing down the notion that people in power are there because of their competency. That might seem like an odd statement to have to make now with how critical the modern person is on social media of like the political establishment. But the truth is, everybody wants to believe that their country's leaders represent the best of their country. But the story of Watergate shows how fragile the line between competency and incompetency is.
And the
So,
morality behind it
in the
because
morality, yeah.
the whole
But yeah,
movie
they're not bright guys and
yeah.
things got out of hand. These guys didn't expect to be caught. They're stupid for even trying to do this. That's what happened. That's basically what he's saying.
And the only way they got away with it was because they were the establishment.
Hmm.
Meaning that there's multiple points during this movie where they're like, the FBI knew? Did the FBI know? Did justice know? Does justice know what's going on? And it's like they're questioning it. But by the time you get to Deep Throat explaining it, where it's like everybody knows, they know exactly what's going on because they're the ones who are in conjunction doing these acts. And there's no morality here. They're just doing it. They're not thinking about what they're doing. They're just like, oh, whatever, let's just do it. And if anybody took the time to look, they would see it. And they talk about it. There's a dialogue in this movie where it's like, how is it 5 reporters out of 2,000 that are in DC are the ones who have figured out this situation? And they mean it as like a skepticism when it's actually the truth, which is
That
crazy.
that and that's a hallmark of any type of great detective movie
True.
that, oh, somebody actually took the time to look. That is a tried and true trope, and that's what part of this movie. I mean, this is what happened in real life, but the fact that you're right, that line there is like, how did 5 guys in Washington figure this out? Well, they took the time to look.
And that's the thing. They have, so I'm talking about conjunction. The conjunction is that heavy information to the way that it's shot, which you're talking about how dialogue is shot. I mean, yeah, nowadays when you can get pretty basic when you shoot a movie, but this movie, they understood, Pakula and Gordon Willis understood that if we want to deliver all this information, we should do it in longer shots. So it's like if you have a longer take, you can keep it compelling if you're moving around the camera. You have really good performances. So it's like you have to have those lines down, and then we can just kind of go from there. Redford and Dustin Hoffman knew their lines so much that they could improvise to cut each other off about delivering the information. So they're keeping it compelling. And what
Mhm.
I was saying before is that they keep you invested, but they also throw in little things where they're like, oh, like, the Cronkite line and things like that. They're obviously trying to figure out a whole situation, trying to get the information through. It's like, I was literally writing on anything, like, and he's throwing like napkins and receipts and all this stuff. And so there's like the drama of that happening. They're delivering the information of like Mitchell and this and that. Yeah, the blah, blah, blah stuff of like the chewy information. But the compelling part is Redford and Hoffman just acting their butts off and just getting around the typewriter and trying to get this information together, right? So it's like they take the time to make the information compelling visually. And
Yeah.
this is like compare it to Spotlight, compare it to the Post. The Post isn't really doing much information wise per se, like delivering information wise, but Spotlight has a lot of information, but it doesn't look like this. But I think the whole comparison to be made with Spotlight is that they can make this compelling, but Spotlight is a story that is even more serious, like considering the harm that these people did and have been doing, and they couldn't do what All the President's Men did. And that's why inherently, even though Spotlight has great information, it's not as good as All the President's Men.
No, and part of the reason too is Spotlight injects a lot of dramatic elements into that story that maybe weren't always needed. And I'm thinking about the Mark Ruffalo character going, "They knew,"
Yeah.
and we
Yeah.
let. I don't even remember what the whole, but it's
Yeah.
like they knew,
Yeah.
and it's like there's not a moment in this where Woodward gets up on the desk and it's just like they knew about it. The FBI knew about it. Like
You're right,
there's no point where that
but
happens,
you're
and
right.
that's a good thing because that's not what happens in real life. That's not how this works. This is slowly trying to figure out this giant conspiracy that's going on. You don't have people screaming about it. That's the difference.
And the difference is that's the filmmaker, isn't it? You have to have a line of where do you make this realistic or do you make this formalist? Like, do you want to make this into a photograph or a painting? And I think that Pakula goes photograph, but he's kind of withering into impressionistic things a little bit with how he's delivering it. He's not. That's what I'm saying. This movie's it justifies his existence in the most compelling way possible because a lot of movies not just recently, but there's some movies that I'll watch and be like, why did y'all have to make this movie? You talk about like, let's say, random movie, Solo. Why did you have to make this movie? We already have these compelling pieces of information. We already have this real news of Empire Strikes Back. Why do I have to go back to a different time and you have to explain all this information? It's not helping the story that you've already made. You have to make this story compelling and then might complement the other story. And All the President's Men complements Watergate. It's not Watergate, but it's complementing it. It's making sense
Yeah.
as to what these two men did and the people around them in this newsroom and how they got that to be compelling is an art itself. It is, I don't know, this is like Remy and Ratatouille just putting it together. That's what it is. But let me, I'll dive into some dialogues because
Yeah.
I wrote, this might be like I wrote a lot for jobs. I might have wrote more for this, honestly.
Okay, go ahead.
So the first one, Harry, you told me you were going to fire Bernstein a month ago. And then Bradley turns around, it's like Woodward and Bernstein are hungry. Remember when you were hungry? I was like, hold up. It's like, and he's so good in this movie. Ben Bradley. So for anybody listening, if you don't know this, Ben Bradley is the editor of the Post at that time. He is played by Tom Hanks in the Spielberg movie, which we'll talk about when we get to recasting. But Ben Bradley used to be one of Spielberg's neighbors in, like, I guess the Hamptons or something like that. So he knew Ben Bradley personally. But whatever, weird facts. I'm gonna keep going. If you're gonna hype it with the facts. I don't mind what you did. I mind the way you did it. So that's when Bernstein and Woodward have their first kerfuffle for 1 second before they're actually working on the case together, where Bernstein is going to the other desk and just, like, lighting a cigarette and essentially picking up Woodward's pages and just refining the page. Like, I'm trying to, like, you don't have the information up here. You need to grab the writer. It
Yeah,
feels like, how we used to,
it's
like, have to review other people's papers, and you're, like, literally going there like, you need to do it like
yeah.
this.
Well,
That's what it feels like in a good
I
way.
worked I worked at the writing center when I was in college for a semester, and that's,
That's
it
what
did bring me back to that where, we'd have people come in for 30-minute slots, and we would go and just walk them through everything they need to change about their paper, and it's like, "Oh, yeah, this needs to be introduced here. This needs a hook. This is the same information stated twice. You need something to support this information." So I have that kind of English teacher thing in me. So I always like seeing anytime in a movie where
but
someone's
it's
they were marking
compelling.
up a piece. Yeah, it's compelling to me.
It's compelling to me too, and I'm like, you know me, I've always had a weird relationship with writing, but I've grown to start loving it now because we've been doing this, honestly. But a quick one right after that is, it's like, well, y'all are working together now, and what does Bradley say? It's like, don't F it up. He says, see, it makes sense that he won an Oscar for this movie because he just comes in so hot in the movie, and it's not over dramatic, right? Is there a moment where, like, he feels like he's hamming it up? He never feels like he's hamming it up.
No, never, never. I mean, this movie, like I said, I compared it to Spotlight, where they ham it up a few times, and that there's not a part in this movie where any of them ham it up, from what I've seen.
Uh,
Maybe some of the Nixon henchmen can get a little hammy, but not even that bad.
but it's
Just kind
archival
of,
footage, right? Like the
yeah.
attorney general sitting on the TV talking about, like, we had
I They were kind of
1500
odd
officers
people.
and all that
Yeah.
stuff, but it's like,
Yeah, they were kinda odd people, so it makes sense, like, the lawyer that he visits in California, like, that guy's a little odd, but I think that was in intentional,
yeah.
I think any of the
Oh,
oddness
you're talking about
that
Segretti.
yeah.
I'm thinking of
Yeah, in
Ned Beatty
California.
in the whole thing with The Office where he, like, walks in and he calls the lady so she
Oh,
leaves
no.
and then
No,
comes
that's a good bit, though. That's a
you
really good bit.
manufactured. Nora
Yeah, right.
Ephron was Bernstein's girlfriend while they were making this movie. They were like, "Oh, we don't really like what William Goldman's doing. Let's write something." The only thing left over from what Bernstein and Ephron wrote was that one scene.
Huh.
And that's why he had a hard time writing this movie because they weren't giving him juice. Like, they're just not letting him do what he wants. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it is what it is, but it's like the final product is there and he won an Oscar for it for
What
a
else you
good
got
reason.
for what else you got for dialogue?
Them arguing about White House. They say White House and WH. They're sitting there,
Hmm.
they're arguing at the typewriter. Like, do I need to put WH or White House? I'm like, they were arguing about diction. I'm like, that's hilarious because I feel like that's I'd have that conversation.
Yeah.
Another one, good piece of American journalism that the New York Times doesn't have. And I'm like,
Huh.
that's what this movie is. That's the name of this movie, actually.
Yeah.
When they're rehearsing P is for Porter, when they're trying to, like, lead on the lady is like, oh, like, there's P.
Yeah.
Okay, obviously that was Porter. And then the way that they're rehearsing it, it's good cop and bad cop.
Yeah.
And then we see them bring it back later in the movie, right? I think was it with Sloan or somebody else? I think it is Sloan. They bring it back with him, and he's like, "Oh, Mitchell or whoever Colson, they don't have the power to do that. It's someone higher than that individual." And we see them rehearse it once, and then they bring it back and use it again, but they don't explain that they're using it.
Hmm.
But we as an audience know that they're using that against him. Okay, I'll hit that Ben Bradley. God dang it. When is someone going to go on record about this story? John Mitchell, he's on the phone and he's talking to Bernstein. And Bernstein, he tells Bernstein, he's like, tell Katie Graham she's going to get her blank caught in a ringer if she publishes that. And I'm like, I forgot. You know, we had the whole conversation with Remember the Titans about censoring and things like that, and I'm
Yeah.
like, good thing they didn't censor that. I feel like that guy probably really said that to them,
Yeah.
and it's like the sexism's there, even though like we see it in the post what she was going through. You see how these men were acting even to her when she did,
Oh, yeah.
like she's getting astray. She caught astray when the situation's not even about her in the first place, right?
Yeah.
And Ben Bradley, he says the whole, like the Hoover story where it's like tell Ben Bradley to go F himself. And I'm like,
Huh.
and I'll get into Ben Bradley now. Ben Bradley, my non-denial denial is, what does he say? It's not said, it's written, where he says, "We stand by our story, Bradley." And that is so good.
And that's probably the best line of the movie, at least to me, honestly, because you still see that. I'll see it all the time in like sports journalism too, where they say, "Hey, we think this trade's going to happen," and the team comes out and it's like this is categorically false, and then you'll see the guy come out or his editor come out and say, "We stand by the story." That is something that is still used today when people have
And
doubts.
what is he then? That's what he says. He's like, "F it. Let's stand by the
Yeah,
boys." And
stand by the
I'm like,
boys.
that's my man right there. So I'm gonna drop the last piece of dialogue and then we'll get to it because this is the only piece of dialogue I really wanted to like actually say,
Okay.
like to like fully, go out with. Ben Bradley, what does he say? He says, the results of the latest Gallup poll? Half the country never even heard the word Watergate. Nobody gives a crap. You guys probably are pretty tired, right? Well, you should be. Go on home, get a nice bath, rest up 15 minutes, and then get your butts back in gear. We're under a lot of pressure, and you put us here. Nothing's riding on this except the First Amendment of the Constitution, freedom of the press, and maybe the future of the country. Not that any of that matters, because if you guys F up again, I'm gonna get mad. And he says, good night, and leaves. And that's from the scene towards the end of the movie where Woodward and Bernstein go to Ben Bradley's house and like, yeah, everything's bugged, and they know the stakes of what they're actually doing now. And he apprises you of the entire situation of like, this is a tiring situation as it is, but you need to understand the stakes of it. And like you were saying, this happens when at the beginning of a movie, typically, right?
Yep.
And he hypes you up for the last like 5 minutes or 3 minutes of the movie. This is where the juice starts now. Like, this is a whole other movie that is real life. You know what happens,
Yep.
but he sets the tone for that so well within like whatever, a
like
paragraph.
like like I was talking about before, that sets up the myth, making Bernstein and Woodward into American heroes by saying at the end, "These are the stakes, by the way, the First Amendment, the country's legitimacy, all this other stuff." The fact that we know that they were successful in getting the story published and Nixon resigning, that's the cherry on top at the end. That's saying these guys are American heroes because if they didn't do what they did and if they would have screwed this up, who knows what would have happened to our freedom of speech and to all these other things. That's a great selection for dialogue and it pairs with my action is the juice pretty well.
In 2024, like, we understand that this country's never been perfect. It'll never be perfect. But in that scene, I'm just like, God bless America. I'm just like, but that's the thing. America is an ideal. I don't ever see it being, it's what people are. And
Mhm.
that sort of brazen attitude to be compelling, to be hopefully morally right in what you're doing. It's not about a bunch of tax paying white men who are reading, who are able to, cause a revolution as a colony from England.
Yeah.
But the whole thing is that they're so compelling as American heroes because they were able to be brazen. They were able to stick with the truth and share it. And we live in a time where we've seen what happens when people do that across the world and even in this country to some extent. So we value what they're trying to do in this movie in the realest ways possible. These people need to know information without bias. And it seems that more and more we can't get that anymore. So something to think about. We're not going to talk about it, but something to think about. But you're talking about music and how there's all this dialogue, lack of music, a lot of diegetic sound. So the Layla, best use of needle drop. There is no needle drop in this movie, but use of score. What is it for you? Because I've got one.
Actually, I'm gonna kind of cheat with this one and kind of extend it to be something else. So if we're talking about
Okay.
the idea of a needle drop,
Yeah.
I think the best needle drop in this movie is at the end with the split diopter shot
Yeah.
where
Split
Nick
diopter.
Yep, where they're showing Nixon's inauguration, his second inauguration on the screen. That's a needle drop there. Having that playing while they're clacking away in the background, the story, yeah, that is like A plus ending shot for a
It's
movie.
cinema.
It is
It is cinema.
cinema. That is
Like
that
you
and
want
the
to explain
that
what
and the
cinema is?
scene when they're in
That's
the
what it is.
library going through the library cards and it's the camera's moving up.
Yeah.
That
That's my
scene
Layla.
and then the final shot there are the two most cinematic shots of this movie. And I so needle drop wise, the decision to throw his inauguration, his victory lap over them writing the story that's going to be his downfall, perfect story telling, perfect cinema. You know, it is what we need.
So talking about the Layla, you're talking about the scene at the Library of Congress, the shot where it's zooming out of them from above. And fun fact, this is scored by David Shire. Do you know who David Shire is?
No.
Do you know who Talia Shire is?
Yeah.
Francis Ford Coppola's sister. That's her husband.
Okay.
He's the guy who he scored The Conversation also, but yeah,
Nice.
he's one of the Coppolas essentially.
Yeah.
And there is a very great lack of score, but the score in Library of Congress when they're going through those reservation cards, that is it really is the best stuff. And Gordon Willis is talking about at some point he's like, yeah, we didn't really put a lot of sauce in this movie, but which is crazy to say because I think there's so much sauce in this movie. But he's like, yeah, it's like the only one of the only ones was that shot that we did in the Library of Congress. Everybody knew what we were doing. And he's so off the cuff with it, and I'm just like, you know what you were doing the entire time. The man he's shot some fantastic stuff. So it's like, yeah, it's a real good conjunction of sound, the visuals, everything, the story, like it's perfect.
Is that your Layla, that scene?
Yeah, that's my
Yep.
Layla.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of great sound in this movie. I was talking about the scene at the restaurant, and there's just this movie feels real, but it doesn't feel like it's off the screen real. Like
Yeah.
you can walk off the screen, I'm sure, with the newsroom, but it's like this feels like a cinematic movie, but it also feels real at the same time. And that's a very tough line to, toe. Because you have people like Paul Greengrass. You talk about United 93, Captain Phillips, his Bourne movies. He has a style that makes it feel real, but there's a different sauce there. This feels more restrained in a sense.
Oh,
More
in a lot of ways, it feels like it wasn't shot as a '70s movie. It feels like it was shot as like a '50s movie, or even before. The performance that we get from Jason Robards is it? How do you is that? How do I
yeah,
say it? Okay,
yeah. As Ben Bradley.
the performance you get from Jason Robards is Ben Bradley reminds me of a performance that you would have got from Humphrey Bogart. Like that is even though he wasn't the lead character, he gives that sort of old school charisma and confidence. And the movie is shot in a way where the camera is not doing too much special. It is in the right place and it's getting the right things, but it's not trying to be flashy. The score is not taking over the movie in the background. There's a lot of character work. There's a lot of letting cameras just sit. Those are things that I would think of in almost a '50s movie, not even a '70s movie. So it gives to the timeless feel of this movie that it already had an older style of thinking and development than other movies. So it just felt timeless immediately.
And Pakula, he actually talks about this since we're talking about the Layla, the music itself, that the acting, this is from him, the acting, the minimalistic music, the look of it, there's a level of professionalism to the movie that
Hmm.
is unthinkable for Hollywood now.
That's a good point. Professionalism. That's a really good way to put it.
And it's the truth. It's like if you watch this movie, I think the everything about it is timeless.
Yeah.
Editing, pacing, everything in between is so timeless. Even some of the shots, there's a shot where Woodward is looking at Bernstein and they have the plaque of Bob Woodward written like at the bottom. It's just out of focus, but you can read it still. And you
Yeah.
can see there's a subjectivity when there needs to be a subjectivity. Ryan Coogler was talking to Roger Deakins on his podcast, and Ryan Coogler's talking about how when I have my cinematographer, me and her, he works with a lot of women cinematographers, which is awesome. And he's like, okay, me and Rachel, we always talk about mode. Like whose perspective is this from? Are we handheld? Are we static? Are we using, dolly crane, steady cam, whatever it is? But it's about perspective and how you shoot that. And there's a lot of points in this movie where it's like omniscient, like we're following them. They make that compelling, but even the subjective shots they make so compelling. Like you're talking about the shot outside when Redford runs outside of the parking garage. He gets to like the middle of the street and then he just does a sharp turn around to look around, and the shot just like zooms out, and
Hmm.
you feel the paranoia he's feeling at that
Yeah.
point of like we might get killed doing this. That's what it feels like. And genius work in this movie, man. And I love Redford. He put this movie together, but maybe someone else could have done it. So, you know who should have been in this movie, Zach? Come on, let's recast a role. Who would you put in this movie? Because Spielberg says half of his job, apparently, as a director, is who you cast in a movie.
Okay. So I usually, when we do these, I try to avoid doing modern recasts, but I wanted to do a modern recast for this one because it's more
It's too
fun.
compelling.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
too compelling to try to not. I really want to think about what would happen if they tried to make this today, and I'm not thinking about the post, which came out,
yeah.
a few years ago.
Which,
Um,
okay, before you get into your casting, Spielberg put Tom Hanks in that role as Ben Bradley. Wrong person, honestly.
yeah,
It's not nepotism, but it's like, oh, that's my buddy, that's my producing
yeah.
partner. We've worked together for like 20 years. I might, yeah, he'll be Ben Badley. It's fine.
No, I agree
Which
with.
he's not bad in the movie, but like, what if it was Mark Rylance?
Yeah, no, there's definitely better options there. So
Okay,
here's what I would do, and I'm gonna recast Woodward and Bernstein as our two main characters here. So if we were gonna make this today, so to replace Robert Redford's Woodward, you need someone who has that golden era Hollywood masculinity, which
yeah,
a lot of modern male actors don't really have that. That's
nope.
not really the trend.
You know
So
how hard it was to find somebody? It
well,
was so hard.
well, that's what I was thinking. I'm thinking Alden Ehrenreich. I can't say his last
Alden
name.
Ehrenreich, you're talking
Thank you.
about. He's bro. Why is I thinking about Solo? I talked about
Oh,
Solo randomly.
Alden Ehrenreich. He was recently in Oppenheimer, but he was also in Solo and Hail Caesar. He has the face, kind of that rugged, masculine face. He has the mannerisms of a golden era Hollywood masculinity, and I think he could do Robert Redford's Woodward part.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you have a Woodward, so I'm gonna let you do yours, and then I'll do
No,
my
no, no, no.
Bernstein.
You know, you told me
Okay,
Woodward. It's Woodstein. You got to tell me
okay,
both.
okay, okay.
Who's Bernstein?
So for Hoffman's Bernstein, I think you need someone who's a little bit more brash, has a bit more energy. I kind of like
Yeah.
that he's a bit shorter than Robert Redford in the movie too. I think that adds like an interesting dynamic there.
There's a bit of more of a fire there.
So I think Daniel Radcliffe would be an interesting pick for the role. He's a bit
Perfect.
older than what I would want, but he has enough of a baby face. I think he could do it, and I think them two together would give that kind of dynamic that Hoffman and Robert Redford have in the real movie.
And Daniel Radcliffe, he can do fiery. When he
Hmm.
wants to do fiery, he's done it. Obviously, Harry Potter, but he's also done it in stuff like Miracle Workers, like the comedy show that he's been on for like 4 seasons.
Yeah.
He's such a compelling actor, and that would be awesome
That would
to
be a
see him in
cool
that.
one-two punch, yeah.
And for me, I was thinking Woodward Bernstein. You have like think Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, right? George Clooney, Brad Pitt, that sort of vibe.
Yeah.
So I was thinking Adam Driver as Bernstein. I'm not worried about height here. I think he could play the crap out of him. He could be a contrarian when he needs to be, and he could play the Richard if he really needs to. You get what I mean?
Yeah.
But like he could do that so compellingly. And my Bob Woodward for him is Bradley Cooper, which he is a good looking dude and all that. And I think Robert Redford, he's a good looking dude too in this. So it's like, and he's got the sauce to
So
do
so you're
Woodward.
aging them up a lot then, because they're supposed to be in their 20s, I'm pretty sure, in this movie.
30, late 30s.
I thought they're supposed to be in their pictures of Bernstein makes them look really young.
Or I don't know. Okay, so I went off of Redford's age.
No,
Redford
I
was
think they were
39.
already a little, yeah, I think so. Okay, so I tried to put it more to late 20s, early 30s.
So I
You went
did.
older.
I did too.
Okay, okay.
So the new one, the saucy, the younger guys, Bob Woodward would be Mike Faced from
I like that.
Challengers
I like
and
that.
West Side Story.
Okay.
He played Danny Lyons in The Bike Riders, which is a
Yeah,
small role, but like I didn't think of him because of the journalistic aspect, but more of the acting aspect that
I like
you
that.
compare him to Riff in, you know, to the 60s Riff,
Yeah.
and I'm like, there's such a regality to his performance, and he's a theater actor and he's got that sauce. And Will Poulter was purely because I know he can do the sauce, and I feel like those two would just argue so
Oh
well
yeah,
together.
Walter as Bernstein makes a lot of sense. I did think about him. That's a
Because
good one.
because my problem is I looked at actors, I keep looking at stuff, I watch so much stuff, and I'm like, I can't think of a compelling actor. Like I thought of Glenn Powell for Woodward or Bernstein, but I'm like, nah, that doesn't work. It doesn't click in my head for him,
Well,
even though he's a good actor.
yeah, I think that Glenn Powell's his charisma is a lot different than Robert Redford's charisma too. I think that's something that you got to try to figure out how to match if you're going to
And
redo this.
so I didn't realize it. So the last movie that Pakula did before he passed was The Devil's Own, if I remember correctly, and it's literally Redford and Brad Pitt. And half the time I was watching the movie, I'm like, oh, that could be Brad Pitt. That could definitely be Brad Pitt. But I didn't want to put him in the role because
He's too old
I
at
don't
this
know.
point.
Even then, I just like
Yeah.
I don't. He has sauce, but I don't know if he has that sauce.
Well,
Even though he looks like he could
it's
literally be
I
Redford's
mean,
son.
it's that old school, it's that Harrison Ford, it's that Robert Redford, that certain type of masculinity that existed in that era of Hollywood that fits this movie so well.
And my temptation was like, I was like, if this wasn't a real person, I would have gone with a person of color because it's like there's no BIPOC characters in this movie really, but I'm like, there's so many BIPOC actors now where I'm like, oh, they could have juiced on
Well,
this, but
I mean, that is actually a good point. There's a lot of actors of color now who have that kind of old school Hollywood masculinity,
which
and it just obviously
which
doesn't work for the story. But I think there's some interesting people. I'm trying to think. Gosh, the guy from I'm blanking. The guy from
first one that came to mind,
Moonlight.
Brian Tyree Henry.
Well, the guy from Moonlight,
Which one?
the main guy. No, not the
Mahershala
supporting.
Ali,
Mahershala Ali, like perfect.
bro,
Throw him
bro.
in. Like obviously this is not the type of movie where that would make sense, but obviously like he's got that masculinity that works for a role like that.
And he played Remy in House of Cards for a little
Yeah.
bit, and that's that sort of character that he'd have to play, that sort of vibe, always has a suit on, and like there's a bunch of, like I said, a lot of chewing the words sort of, dialogue, and he could have done
Yeah.
it.
Don't
He could have
don't cancel me, but Spacey would have been a great Ben Bradley.
soapbox.
Let's
Get
just
up on
keep
your
going.
soapbox, Zach.
Yeah, let me make this my soapbox. No, I'm not gonna do that. Yeah.
No, but seriously, do you have a soapbox take about All the President's Men?
I do. It's not like a huge soapbox. This is like a smaller soapbox. This probably should be
Yeah.
height of soapbox, depending on how hot our soapbox take is. This is a
So
small
how hot
take.
is the coffee?
This is lukewarm. But
Okay.
the reason this movie holds up is because it's a transcript. It's not a manuscript. When you watch it, it's like you're watching an elevated History Channel program, and I mean that in the best way possible. The movie is
Like this is perfection
yeah.
for that.
Well, yeah, this movie's all a plot. There's no love interest. There's no plot of Nixon's cronies lurking around. There's no Ben Bradley trying to fire them subplot. The movie feels really fast still because even though it's over 2 hours long, it's all information. It's all names coming at you as your characters learn it. So you have to stay engaged because if you don't stay engaged in this movie and you look away too long, you're going to risk losing the thread of the entire movie and not understanding what's happening anymore. So it's all a plot is what I'm trying to say here.
I want to show this to like some younger people and see if they say if it's boring, because I like in my head this cannot be boring. Like for me, in my opinion, like I like history, but I could not give two craps about Nixon, Watergate, any of this stuff. But the way that this movie frames everything makes it so compelling where I'm like, why didn't I care about this more? Now I got to go read about this. This is actually compelling what's happening in real life, but it's the movie that brings the sauce for it though.
Hmm. What do you have for your soapbox?
Don't come after me, anybody listening to this,
All
but
right.
this movie is more important for our culture than The Godfather will ever be. And
How did I
Pakula,
kick
he
you out
made
of the
a
stream?
recently, Donald Sutherland just passed away recently. I watched Clute, which is one of Pakula, if not his first movies, one of his first movies. Gordon Willis shot that too. But even that movie, misnamed, it's about Jane Fonda and she's amazing in that movie. And that movie ages so well because of the conversation it has theme wise and how it's set, as the approach of it being about this woman. And that's compelling. That ages well. That'll always age well. The Godfather is so famous, so well known. The family dynamics and all the beauty of it is always going to be there, but it's not necessarily something that's changing my life, in a sense of like I can see it happening outside or something like that. And obviously we have Goodfellas and all this other stuff where I'm not going to dive into that. But what he does with All the President's Men is so much more compelling. It's so much more relevant because of the way they made it. But on top of that, the themes that it's exploring. Because we live in an era where fake news is a thing, which we're not going to dive into all that, but it's about journalism. It's about why this is so important. I love movies like this. Yeah, because they're detective movies. There's a mystery. They're uncovering this web of things that are going on, but it's because people are so compelled, so, filled with perseverance that they want to go do this. And it's thrilling because of that. So that's my soapbox take, which is like, I no discount to Godfather, Godfather 2. Like, I love, these romantic Shakespearean Greek tragedy sort of stories. That's my bread and butter too. But like, this is the more analytical, realistic, looking out in the real world and finding relevant themes to the movie. Sort of like my thinking cap is on. And I think Gordon Willis talking to Pakula, where he's like, "Yeah, I think we made an intellectual movie with this one." He's like, "Don't tell anybody."
First thing, I just want to let everybody know each of our thoughts are our own thoughts and opinions, and what he just said about The Godfather, I do not support.
Put some
Brother,
respect on all the president's men.
yeah, you talking about a movie that one of the best movies about immigration and the American dream and what the
That's the
American
second
dream
movie. That's
needs.
the second movie. I'm talking about The Godfather.
The first movie does that too. And all I'm
Bro,
trying to
I
say
am a
is
first generation immigrant. Don't tell me.
you're
Don't tell me that.
discounting one of the most important movies in film
No,
history.
but I'm talking
You
about
can
relevance to the culture. I'm not
I
talking about like
Godfather
I'm
is
not
not relevant to the culture, man. What are
but
you talking about?
it's relevant because it's a
We have
like a
2
Rushmore.
freaking Italian places in our town that's named
It's
after the freaking Godfather.
But
What are you
it's
talking
a
about that's not
Rushmore
relevant to
thing.
the
I'm talking
culture?
about, like, in terms of affecting the culture. Like, a story about a woman is more compelling now because The Godfather has Sonny's sister getting beaten, and he goes to, like, go and save her, and that it's like, that doesn't age well
That
to our
aged
times.
fantastic. The whole movie aged
It's
fantastic.
fantastic.
It's like one of the greatest movies of all time.
It's
I can't
fantastic.
believe
It's a
you have
fan
to
no,
put it
no, it's
down. You don't have
I'm
to
not
put that
discounting
down
it.
to elevate this movie,
No, no,
bro. You don't have
I'm
to
not
do
putting
that.
it down. I'm just talking about the
You put me in
legacy.
position to defend The Godfather. It's like I got all 5 pieces of Exodia over here. No one's gonna agree with you. I
Bro, it's not my fault Apocalypse Now is a better movie.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
It goes Godfather 2, it goes Apocalypse Now, and then The Godfather,
Oh
okay?
god.
And then The Conversation. I rewatched that recently too, but
Oh. We gotta turn this off and just start a Godfather pod right now. We
but
gotta hash this out.
but I don't know. That's my truth. Imma live my truth. That's my opinion, okay? That's why it's a soapbox
Damn.
thing. I came in hot today, didn't
You
I?
brought in like a 10-foot tall soapbox, man. I had like a 10-inch
I
tall one. You
came
had like a 10-foot tall one.
You came in with a firecracker, I came in with a nuclear bomb.
That's right, man. Nuclear bomb versus coughing baby for real. Jesus.
Call me Oppie. Call me Oppenheimer. Imma quote the Gita real
Speak
quick.
Speaking of Oppenheimer, do you wanna go over the, Oscars
The
here?
Oscars.
Because we got a lot going on.
Run the Oscars because I don't.
Okay.
Who should have? What did it win? What
Okay.
was
Let me
nominated?
just
What
give the
was going on in
rundown of what happened
1977?
with it. So,
Because I
it
think we're going
had
to talk
8
about one of these movies
nominations,
soon.
4 wins. It won for actor in a supporting role, that was Jason Robards, Ben Bradley. Yep, art direction, which we talked about a bit about the set design, so the art direction played a role in that, definitely. It won for sound, which makes a lot of sense, and it won for writing, screenplay based on material from another medium, which is what they used to call adapted screenplay.
So for
Um,
anybody who doesn't know, this is the year that Rocky came out.
yeah, so
So what's funny
I'll
is,
run through
so
that.
listen to this comparison. I was thinking about it. I wrote it before I even looked at the Oscars. I was like, Moneyball is Rocky plus All the President's Men, in my opinion. And then I was like, oh, it's the same year. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, this makes sense.
Um, well, so it did have 4 nominations and lost. Actress in a supporting role, Jane Alexander. Directing by, Alan Pakula. Film editing, and Best Picture. Let me tell you everybody that was in Best Picture because this is one of those years that was incredible for Best Picture. And it makes sense that it
The
didn't win,
70s,
honestly.
man.
So, yeah, 70s had a lot of this. So, here's everything that was nominated for Best Picture. Bound for Glory, which that's the lowest one. That's one we don't really think about much anymore. All the President's Men, Network,
Sheesh.
Network, Taxi Driver, and then the winner was Rocky.
And that's the
That's a
thing.
tough group.
Sidney Lumet,
Yeah.
Taxi Driver. I'm sorry, excuse me. I just put two wrong people together.
Yeah.
Sidney Lumet and Network.
Yeah.
Network still might be one of the best movies of all time. It's one of, if you want it for me, Dog Day, 12 Angry Men, Serpico, and Network. That's his Mount Rushmore of movies.
So I do want to call out for actor in a leading role. We didn't get Robert Redford here, and I'll tell you who we got. We got
Okay.
Peter Finch won for Network.
He is so good in that movie,
Yeah,
man. He's so good in that movie.
Robert De Niro was nominated for Taxi Driver. God, what a year to lose.
Right?
William Holden from Network as well.
He's playing more, I'd say, closer to Ben Bradley sort of role.
Yeah.
So, but it's Network, so it's like, there's a different dynamic going on there.
G-
So lead actor made sense.
Giancarlo Gianni for Seven Beauties. Not quite sure about that one. And then Rocky, Sylvester Stallone was nominated. So there's probably one spot where Robert Redford could have gone, but even then, this was a stacked list of actors in a leading role for this one.
You know what year this compares to overall? This
What?
literally compares to 2015
I knew you were going to
because
say that.
there was
Yeah.
Creed, and we have a big whatever journalism movie, and
Yep.
that journalism movie ended up winning. Not
I thought 20.
nec-
Yeah, that was the
not
Mad Max.
necessarily Steve Jobs,
Steve
Big Short.
Jobs,
We
Big
talk a lot
Short.
about 2015,
We
which
do
is like apparently is a
too
sleeper
much.
year
Yeah.
movie. But it's like the comparison is that it shows the shift of time of where I think if All the President's Men came out today, it would win all the awards. It would just
Well,
run.
you go back to looking at Zodiac, which is probably the closest we've gotten in terms of tone to All the President's Men, and
Yeah,
I don't
tone,
know if it
but not
won.
content is more closer to Spotlight. Yeah,
Yeah, I guess Spotlight. I guess you're right. Spotlight's probably the closest in terms of a modern movie, not Zodiac, and that did
but
win.
it's like everything. But that's the thing. It's like third train. It's like they have a ranking thing, and it probably got higher ranked
Yeah.
compared to The Big Short and Mad Max Fury Road, all the other movies we've loved. But yeah, it's interesting. I'm glad that Robards won, though.
Mhm.
Jason, like,
He definitely
he's
deserved it.
fantastic. This is a career best performance
And
probably
just
from
so
him.
because people have seen him in other stuff, let me give you a few things he's been in.
Did
You
you know
already know
that
this.
Talia Shire was nominated for Rocky? We're going to talk about Rocky later,
Yeah.
but she was nominated for Rocky. I didn't realize Adrian was
Well,
nominated.
I did just want to throw out some stuff that Jason Robards was also in. He was in Once Upon a Time in the West. He was in Magnolia.
Yep.
He was
Yeah, that's one
in.
of his last roles.
Yeah, I mean, he
He's
was in.
so good in that.
Yeah, he was also in Philadelphia. He was in the old school version of Heidi. He was in The Ballad of Kayla Hogue, The Day After, Julia, Long Day's Journey into the Night. So he was in Tora, Julius
Classic
Caesar.
stuff.
Like he was
Classic.
in a lot of classic
He is in
Hollywood.
Julius Caesar.
Yeah.
Miss Newton, she showed us that version of Caesar.
Mm,
Bro, I didn't even remember that.
yeah. I mean, he was in a lot of like really important parts. I just think back to him in Magnolia was like a very great role, and I know it was one of his last. So he's definitely a great actor. So I'm glad he was able to get an award for this.
Who was nominated for directors in this year?
That's let me tell you, man. Okay, directing. You got John G. Avildsen winning for Rocky. You got Pakula for All the President's Men. Face to Face, Ingmar Bergman.
Goated.
Network, Sidney Lumet.
Goated.
Who do you think the last one was?
Seven Beauties.
Oh, you have it up. Yeah, where's
Yep.
Scorsese? Whereas Scorsese did not get a nomination for director as usual.
But it's like All the President's Men, Ingmar Bergman, Sidney Lumet, and you all picked Rocky. No offense to Rocky, but
I mean,
that's the
dude,
thing.
you got to
Once
remember
in a
what
while,
Rocky was when it came out.
Rocky
And
is
it
one
still
of the,
is.
if you want to talk about, okay, Rocky has a more culturally significant vibe than The Godfather, which is true.
Yeah,
You can't argue with me about that.
I mean,
Bro, you can't tell me if you go to a gym you haven't heard. I'm joking, but seriously.
have you been to any cheesy Italian restaurant in the last 20
But
years?
it's not about that. You literally, one of my favorite restaurants is named Corleone's, but
Like, that's what I'm saying.
but I'm just joking. But seriously, like, all the other nominees, like the directors, they did something.
It's a
That's
stacked
what I'm saying.
list.
Like, there's more compelling work there. And Alvinson, he did do a great job with Rocky, which is a sports movie that's actually a love story. So it's like we love romance stories here on the pod. So, that's probably the one that we would go with off of instinct. But no, I'd go with All the President's Men or Network. Bro, it won for film. Rocky won for film editing. The editing on,
Yeah, no, any of them that All the President's Men lost was either to Rocky or Network, pretty much.
yeah.
And, those were it was really a three-horse race that year. I mean, it should have been a four-horse race with Taxi Driver, but it never really I don't think it got much.
But see, that's the thing. It
Let me
speaks
see.
to the legacy of this movie, doesn't it? Because
Taxi
the
Driver didn't win
legacy,
anything. Yeah.
yeah, the legacy of this movie, the legacy of this year of movies is that we're still talking about those 4 movies
Yeah.
because they're so freaking good, man.
Definitely a fantastic year for movies.
So through the prism of time, what pops up, whether it's someone behind the screen, in front of the screen, freaking All the President's Men, one of my favorite movies.
So there's a few things I think about when I think about the legacy of this movie. One, all these different procedural investigative movies owe to All the President's Men. I'm talking Zodiac, Spotlight, and The Post, which are 3 we brought up multiple times on here.
Salute.
And that's there's tons more that have taken from it, but those are 3 significant ones that have really taken from this movie in the last couple decades. So I wanted to comment on that. I also just want to say it's really interesting that this is not Redford or Hoffman's best role. And
True.
that speaks to, even though they are fantastic in this movie, I think that speaks to the fact of how significant those 2 actors are. That when you bring up those actors' best movies, this is not the first or second movie that comes up for either of them.
But their chemistry together is
It's
for the
fantastic.
books.
Oh,
This
yeah.
is like Jackie Chan, Chris
Chris
Tucker.
Tucker.
That's for anybody listening. That's gold standard right
Yeah,
there.
no, and you have to nail that for this movie to work. But something also not to forget, and we did talk about this in the beginning, but movies that come out like right after an event happens, like this came out a few years after Watergate, 9
Less
out of
than
10,
2 years.
yeah,
Like
9 out of
this
10
is
times those are not very good. There's not a lot of these that happen. Usually people are smart enough
there's a
now not
lot.
to do it.
There's a lot, but we don't want to mention them because they're so
Well, they're
forgettable.
forgettable. Yeah, that's
They're
the thing. Like
forgettable.
like the Deepwater Horizon or like
Okay,
there was the
Deepwater Horizon is
George
the only
W.
one.
Bush movie that came
Yeah,
out pretty quickly, not Vice, but another one that came out kinda quickly after or during his time, like, these
the
things
Josh Brolin one.
yeah, these things happen, and then they're just not very good typically. Even Zero Dark 30 is probably the closest to one that worked, but even then, that came out years later. They only
Came out
had
4
in
years.
the Bin Laden raid at the very
Yeah,
end because that happened in real life, but these usually don't work is what I'm saying. So it's significant that this is not only a historical document because it came out right after, but it also didn't suck. Like that's an important thing to note
which is
here.
crazy.
Yeah. So those are the 3 things legacy wise I wanted to comment on.
And Alan Pakula, this is one of his first 5 movies. He made Clute, Parallax View with was it Warren Beatty? Like really good
Mhm.
70s movie. Obviously, All the President's Men. You've heard of Sophie's Choice, Pelican Brief, Presumed Innocence with Harrison Ford, The Devil's Own, which I talked about with Brad Pitt. And it's like he had an illustrious career that was still compelling. Like it's rare that someone makes more than 2 movies that you talk about. This
Yeah,
has
for sure.
a lot more. So Gordon Willis, Godfather, 1, 2,
Stop bringing up
President's Men.
Godfather. Get that out of your tongue. Get that out of
But
your tongue. You
Gordon
disrespected it too
did,
much today.
he did them both.
I'm
He
gonna have to
did a
find
lot.
someone else to do the
And,
Godfather
well,
pod. Apparently, I can't do it with you.
we'll do part 2. That's fine with me.
I actually like part 1 more than part 2.
I like part 2, and that's why I have to watch part 2 again. That's all it is. But he is a legend.
Yeah,
That like the way this movie is so dark, but you can tell what's going on. So it's like somebody needs to take notes because they've got new cameras and they're like, "Oh, this looks bright enough," and then no, it's not.
no.
You watch House of the Dragon, you watch Game of Thrones, and it's like,
Oh,
what's going on? And it's like
yeah.
I've got a TV where I can do that, but
Yeah, they blame the television set. It's like, yeah, I think if a million people are having this issue with not being able to see stuff, it's not the television
it's
set, buddy. Yeah.
yeah.
And
It's
the
like
fact that movies still can't figure out how to film night scenes without you know how often I've been to the theater and it's been a random action movie and they're filming a fight at night and I'm just like I
can you
can't
tell what's
even
going on?
begin to
Yeah,
tell. That really bad one, that Netflix one with the fantasy characters, that cop movie with Will Smith.
it's good. I liked Bright.
Bright was not very bright, despite the name. The night shit
No,
in
it
that
wasn't.
wa
No, it
the
wasn't.
sorry,
It
the
wasn't.
night
You're right.
scenes in that was not very legible
No,
for a
and
movie
that's the
called
problem.
Bright.
That's why it's like they're skewing towards a different approach, and it's like y'all forgot what was already good in the first place. So it's
Yeah.
like this is a great reminder. you talked about Redford. Obviously, Redford and Hoffman just goated actors, no matter what's going on. Like Redford founded Sundance, right?
Did he?
Yeah, Sundance is
Another
his
reason
thing,
Redford rocks. There you go.
right? But that being said, MVP. Who put the team on their back for this movie? As KD says, "You the MVP, mom. Who's the MVP?"
I mean, you said it. It's Robert Redford.
Yeah,
And when I went to watch this movie at first, I did not think I would give it to him. I thought I'd go to Pakula, or I thought maybe a set designer or someone else, or maybe even the Ben Bradley character. But I think Robert Redford is the glue that holds this movie together. That's what I came away with watching this time. So much of the
behind the
film,
camera and in front of the camera.
yeah, I mean, he literally is the one who got this project started. So much of this film is the camera watching his movements, though, and his, like, reactions to things, how he handles a phone call, how he flips through his notes, his facial expressions, staying composed in tough situations, when he's showing confident, but he's still not sure where to go next. It's a leading man performance that asks for so much, but it never asks for anything over the top. The only time we get emotion from him is during the final Deep Throat meeting, and even then, he knows never to dial it up all the way. There's so many ways during that final confrontation he could have dialed it up, and he didn't. In the wrong hands, it could have easily just been an overdramatic performance. And if they would have done that, it would have taken away from the story's focus on the facts and would have actually hurt the legitimacy of the whole movie. So I completely give it to Redford.
And Redford, this is one of the only movies where you'll watch and you're looking at the credits and it says a Redford slash Pakula movie at the beginning of the movie. I'm like, I don't think I've ever seen an actor and a director have the same a film like a Quentin Tarantino film. This is a
With him
Spike Lee
first.
joint
With him first.
with his name pursed to it, and
Yeah.
it's not alphabetical either.
Yeah. That's a big deal. It shows
and
how involved he was.
and he knew from the jump that this had to be told, and he got Pakula together, who's another MVP. He got Gordon Willis on there. He got Hoffman on there. He was like, I don't need. He could have had an actor who was maybe lesser known, but he got another actor that's pretty much the same level of like, this dude is doing as good. It's like Arnold and for action movies, it'd be Arnold and Stallone doing a movie together. That's what it is. But this is drama, and it is fantastic.
Well, this was Hoffman at the kind of still at the height of his power, right?
Oh
Like, I'm
yeah,
trying to call
100%.
up some of the name, but this had to be um,
Tootsie Arrow. It's
Tootsie. I mean, of course, I try to Google him real
Parallel
quick so it
Marathon
gives me
Man.
anything.
There's a
This
lot.
was after The Graduate. Yeah, this was that era, that Marathon Man era, before Tootsie, but still Tootsie's coming. Like,
Yeah,
this is
peak era.
peak or almost peak Dustin
Yeah,
Hoffman that he gets him, and he's okay to being the number 2 in this movie. He clearly is the number 2 when it
but
comes
he's
to the
still
leads.
he's so fiery that like he never feels like a number two,
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
and I love it.
So Robert Redford, is he your MVP?
He's my MVP too.
Sweet.
It's like that's why I love the other guys, but it's like he's the one who put it together, which is it's like Pakula, his approach and those things they matter, but this story needed to be told in this format specifically, and that's the whole point today. And I'm glad this exists.
Yeah.
And this is another movie where it's like study this movie because it's like you can make anything compelling. If they can make this compelling, the sky's the limit.
Oh yeah.
So there are other movies that are out there like this. What are your companion movies for this?
The only one we talked about a lot that try to emulate this, if you really want to go watch The Post, it's not bad. If you want to go watch Spotlight, it's good. But if I were to recommend one movie and for some reason you haven't seen it yet, I think Zodiac's a very interesting movie to compare to this. It's almost like a spiritual successor in some ways to this movie because to me it's like Fincher's like pessimistic take on journalism,
Yeah.
where it's like he draws back to his overarching idea that he likes to say that people are perverts. So he's looking at journalists as perverts, as people who are very weirdly interested in what someone else has done and wanting to learn all the facts about it. And while All the President's Men is a very more optimistic view and a reverential view of the profession, but watching the two together, I think would be a very, very interesting experience.
The one that compares, you already said The Post and Spotlight, but the ones that compare for me are The Insider. It's Michael Mann, 1999, Russell Crowe, Pacino, peak era. Like, I don't think they, like, after Gladiator, I don't think besides The Irishman that, or The Pope's Exorcism, that either one has been has been great after that. But like peak, last eras for them. But the movie itself, the story, the struggle of them trying to get that story to screen about the cigarette tobacco companies is so compelling. And it's as close as you get to this. A Private War, 2018 movie directed by Matthew Heineman. I've mentioned it before. It stars Rosamund Pike as Marie Colfin, a real journalist, and it's not a biopic, but it does follow her for a part of her career as a journalist and a photojournalist. How she lost her eye, and she's in like Sri Lanka, and there's people shooting at her. There's real things going on with the journalism she's trying to find, and that's a different personal take on what the journalism life is. We had Civil War this year from Alex Garland, which I finally got Zach to watch, and he's right that it's not a perfect movie, but it's a compelling movie, a compelling take on what's going on with the news now. So if you want a cool movie from 2024 to check out, Civil War is one.
I think that's a good call out. I just wanted to add, it's not going to be anything similar to the style of this movie, which is what I was aiming for. But if you're interested in movies that are about journalism, I think people have a lot of takes on what the Civil War movie is about. But I think at the end of the day, it is a journalism movie. And I'll let people who watch, I won't spoil anything, but when you watch it, you're going to draw your own conclusions on what it's trying to say about journalism. And I think some of them are pretty fascinating, even if it doesn't always get all the way there for me.
And you could just Google what Alex Garland says about it too, if you need to.
Yeah,
if you can't figure it out for yourself, which I mean, he says it blatantly. He does such a good job with it. But the other personal kind of journalism movie for me was Origin, which I keep mentioning, Ava DuVernay. But it's like there's a very real piece of journalism being done of going around the world and figuring out what these systems of oppression are that took place in America, in India, in Germany, Nazi Germany. So it's like there's a whole thing that rounds to that. And then there's a personal story to it too that she's trying to go through. So it's like the journalism genre itself is transformed and it goes into different avenues. And it's depending on what's going on outside in the world. So it's compelling. It's always compelling. And I hope they make more movies like this because it feels like journalism is dying and the journalism movie should never die. So that's it. Got the check. We're going to get back to typing on our keyboards with another episode.
That's right.
There's no Nixon coming, okay? We don't have to worry. There's no boogeyman.
Well, we'll see.
But we're typing. We'll be back, y'all. Peace and love.
Peace and love. See y'all.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Cinema Pursuit. Cinema Pursuit is produced by Katie Nadell, Zach Nadell, and Vikash Patel. Special thanks to Cole Cooper for the intro and outro music. You can listen to Cinema Pursuit on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever else you may listen to podcasts. Follow us on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram at Cinema Pursuit Podcast, Twitter or X at Cin Pursuit Pod, and check out our subreddit, r/Cinema Pursuit.